Now, what does raising the sub output on your Sonos Sub do to your Sonos sound signature? Does it help correct the bass deficiency coming out from your sub with 14.12 and 14.14? Let's find out today. Now, I usually do upfront summaries in my videos, and by far this should be the easiest upfront summary I've ever had to do. So increasing your sub output from 0 to plus 15 raises the sub output, and reducing it reduces the sub output. So the bass response from your system will change accordingly. Now, in the recent update for 14.12 and 14.14, Sonos actually said that if the sub is paired with a Sonos Arc, there is a chance that by changing the sub output, you're not going to be able to recover the bass that was going to be missing with the update of 14.12 and 14.14. Now, did it affect me and not affect you? I don't know, because from the changes that I've seen from doing the frequency response sweeps, I actually noticed that the sub output was raised when I increased the sub output. But as usual, it is not that straightforward. So to end off my upfront summary, I would say that by increasing the sub output from your Sonos Sub, you are going to recover more mid-bass range. And if you're going to be reducing it for any reason, as though Sonos has not reduced it enough, you will reduce the lower end of the sub output. Now, I'd like you to spend a little bit more time with me and stick with me while I run through the whole process and run through the frequency response sweep that I've measured all the way from minus 15 on the sub output to 0, and then from there, from 0 all the way to plus 15. So there are a couple of things I'd like to get out of the way first. Well, just two things. For those of you who are not very familiar with the Sonos ecosystem, first I'm going to run through how do you add a sub to your system, and second, where to access the settings panels. Alright, so first, let's add a sub to your system. All you have to do is to go into the settings tab under the Sonos S2 app, and you choose the system that you want to add the sub to. And from there, you have to select the correct sub to add to your system. You could have more than one sub that is already in your system, so choose the one that you want to add. Now, this will take a couple of moments, but once it's connected, that's it. A tone will play through your setup, and you will know that the sub has been added. And if you have a sub Gen 3 in your system, you can even pair another sub for a dual sub setup, assuming you are using a home theater setup like the Sonos Ray, the Sonos Beam, Beam Gen 1 or Gen 2, Sonos Arc, or the M. Even the older play bars and the play bass is also supported. You can also do Trueplay at this point with a compatible iPhone or iPad. So that is it, and that is all to it to add a sub into your Sonos system. Now, Sonos systems are meant to be very modular, very easy for you to add things on as you go along. Of course, considering that the price doesn't include the sub, it might get a little bit pricey, but Sonos does have a range catering from the budget-friendly Sonos Ray all the way to the mid-range Sonos Beam Gen 2, as well as the highest-end Sonos Arc. If you have an iOS or an iPad device, then you will want to do Trueplay. Well, as of this moment in early September, Trueplay will still break the sub output. They are likely to come up with a fix by the end of the month. This is meant to be an evergreen video, so it will actually show you the differences, but the differences may be changed when the patch is released. But for the long run, having Trueplay is actually a good thing. Trueplay helps tune your system to fit into your room and your surrounding, because your room is different from mine. The size is different. The amount of furnishing inside is different. The amount of sound treatment in the room is also different. So Trueplay will help take care of that by removing the peaks and rescuing the valleys, if there are any, in your sound response. Alright, so here we will show you how you are actually going to make any setting changes to the setup that you have just made. Now, you will go into the settings tab under the Sonos S2 app. Now, you will choose the system that you want to adjust. Scroll down to the system that you want to adjust and go down to the sound section. The sound section is on the same page, and from there, you will be able to access EQ page. On the EQ page, you'll see bass and treble response. You can adjust this in any direction that you want, from -10 to +10. Loudness is also the same page, and you can toggle on and off. For Trueplay, you can turn it on or off. For systems with height adjustment like the Beam Gen 2 as well as the Sonos Arc, you can also adjust the heights channel. Now, the volume limit, do remember, set it at 100. By default, it's 100. Don't change that. Finally, the sub audio. So sub audio can go down all the way to -15 or go up all the way to +15. So these are all the changes that you should be making to your sound system, easily accessible to you on a very beginner level. You don't have to go into the phase, you don't have to go into the surround, distance settings and all that kind of stuff. So for now, just stick with me. We will be exploring for today what changing the sub output from -15 all the way to 0 and to +15, what it does to the sound. So I'm going to be pulling up some charts, and these charts were actually done on version 14.12, and that was when Trueplay supposedly would have broken the sub output. Now the sub output, when Trueplay is toggled on from 14.12 onwards to 14.14, which should be fixed by the next update, it was actually reducing the sub output by quite a bit in the lower bass region. So for those of you who are complaining that there's not enough bass, what can you do? Right? So one of the settings that you can and should go in to try and play around to see whether it affects you is the sub output level. Now, on this particular screen here, you will see a highlighted chart, which is red outlined by yellow. And this is the frequency response of a Sonos Arc coupled with a sub with Trueplay turned on and the sub output level set to 0. Right? So this is the neutral sub setting. Now, you'll see a lot of color lines above and a lot of color lines below. Now, just for completeness, I will say that I ran out of space to actually plot these curves, and I only managed to do -15 all the way to 0 and to +13, right? So the maximum curve you see here is actually a +13. By +13, I mean, you will see that the +14 and +15 will just increase on that. Now, I've got to go through this curve slightly because while it seems pretty straightforward that increasing the sub output means increasing the sub output and reducing the sub output means lowering the bass volume, it is actually not as straightforward as that. So to get the mid-range and the treble out of the way, you will see that from about 200 Hz onwards, whether you change the sub or you increase or reduce the sub output, it does nothing to the mid-range, it does nothing to the treble response, right? You will think that the sub cutover point, the crossover, is about 200 Hz, but that's not the case. This curve has been actually evened out. So when you smooth it out a little bit, some of these gets dragged out a little bit, the proper cutover point is about 100 Hz, thereabout. From experience, it was at 110 Hz, but that's not what I'm seeing today. So it could be a function of the 14.12 and the 14.14 update, but we'll leave that for another day. When they release the patch, we'll see whether the crossover point is changed or not. But for now, you will see that by increasing the sub volume, okay, it actually brings up the mid bass quite a bit. This bold white line here, it represents 100 Hz, right? So at about 100 Hz point, you'll see that between 70, 80, 90, that's where the peak of the output from the sub is happening. And when you increase the sub volume, it keeps pushing the mid bass upwards, right? So mid bass is good. I mean, you get some kind of thump, but you will lose a lot of presence of the bass. The lower, more enveloping kind of bass is actually living below 50 Hz also. So the very, very capable subwoofers, they go down to 20 Hz. Some of them even go down to just over 10 Hz, all right? I've lived with those subwoofers before. They are fantastic, but they take up a lot of space. Now, the Sonos Sub Gen 3 or the Sub Gen 2 or the Sub Gen 1, all of them being the same size, they actually take up quite little space, not to mention the possible upcoming Sub Mini. So what the sub setting is doing to the sub is that it keeps pushing up the mid bass. I'm not sure if that is the intention or is that a function of how Trueplay is breaking the Sonos Sub at this moment. But the short takeaway of this is that you can assume that by increasing the sub output, you will be increasing the bass. Now, the danger of that is that it could appear muddy, right? Because boosting up the mid bass by that amount could make your system muddy. Yes, sure, you'll get a bit more impact, you'll get a little bit more kick in your bass response, but you are risking upsetting the balance of the entire curve by boosting up the mid bass by that amount, right? But if you look at the curves below the highlighted yellow line here, this is what happens when you start reducing the bass output from the sub. So sub -1, sub -2, all the way to sub -15, this is what you're going to get. Now, you will notice that when you reduce the sub output, it doesn't bring down the mid bass by that much. So it is as opposed to increasing the sub output, you are pushing the mid bass up primarily. All right. Of course, the lower bass gets pushed up a little bit as well, but the primary push is actually on the mid bass side. Whereas reducing the sub output, it doesn't drag down the mid bass by that much. It starts dragging down the lower range of the bass response. Now, that is definitely not desirable. If your room has certain issues with certain frequencies, like you have a specific size room and some bass frequencies are being emphasized because you push the sub into a corner or next to the cabinet and is resonating at a certain low frequency, yes, you might want to cut those things out, those frequencies out. But in most cases, you don't want to do that because it actually takes away from the enjoyment of the bass output, especially if you bought a sub really just to boost the bass output. So in summary, without referring in detail to the chart, I would say that increasing the sub output pushes up mid bass, reducing the sub output pulls down the lower bass. Just bear this in mind before you go about setting and tuning your system. But honestly, it is really to your liking. Try it out and see whether that works for you. Now, this whole chart was generated using one sub. Now, if you think about it, with one sub and you are able to increase the sub output by this amount, why do people want to pair dual subs? Now, with the introduction of the Sub Gen 3, you are actually able to pair dual subs into your system for the home theater systems, which includes the Play Bar, the Play Bass, as well as the Sonos Arc, as well as the Beam Gen 1 or Gen 2, and the Sonos Amp as well. So if you think about it, if by just increasing the sub output, you can push this up, why do people want to add another sub? Now, there are many reasons for that, right? Because bass, it can pull in a corner. So what happens when you have another sub is that you can place them in opposing corners or in different parts of the room so that you are able to even out the room response, the bass response, throughout the entire room. But that will be another topic for another day. I am actually thinking of doing a video that compares running one sub with a +15 output versus two sub at a +0 output. So maybe you don't actually have to spend money to get more bass. If Sonos Sub allows a +15 adjustment to the sub output, why do you need to spend another $700 to get the subwoofer? But then again, you can actually do a +15 on both subs. So food for thought. So if this has been helpful to you, do consider leaving me a super thanks. It gives me a small one-time contribution towards my coffee fund to reward me for the kind of work that I put in using my spare time to actually come up with these kind of studies for you guys. I also have a Patreon account, which I have actually linked up in the QR code right here, and you can actually scan through and it sets up a monthly contribution to keep me producing work on a monthly basis for you guys. Now, even if you guys don't contribute, I don't mind. Just come in and join this community. I'm here to share. So now that you have learned to adjust the sub output and you've learned what adjusting the sub output does to your system, that's a very important point, right? In fact, I think you should even do that before you start adjusting, which is the placement of the sub. So in terms of placement of sub, that is probably one of the most important consideration in the entire setup of your sound system. Now, you have a play bar, or if you have any Sonos soundbar, it's going to be sitting below the TV. That's where it has to be. It's in the center, right? But the sub, you can actually place it in a couple of different positions. So if you want to learn how to place the sub and even the orientation, whether is it facing you or is it facing sideways, or is it going to be laid down, or you can put it under a couch or anywhere, do remember, check out this video, which I'm going to be linking right here, and it will step you through. Now, the video was done quite a while back. I'm thinking of doing a refresh of the video, but in any case, it is still a relevant video today. Remember, check it out. Otherwise, I will see you in my next video.